Hey everyone, John here, with even more Switch 2 news. Although this first one has nothing to do with the Switch 2, this is just general Nintendo. And that's because Universal accidentally revealed the title to the second Mario movie. If you were to go on their website right now, you would see this post right here, basically outlining their upcoming films. So things like Wicked for Good, Black Phone 2, Him, Nobody 2, Bad Guys 2, How to Train Your Dragon, and so on and so on. But yesterday, there was another movie in here, and thank you to Wario64 for catching this. As you can see right here, Super Mario World is among these. And this is officially from Universal, who own Illumination. So this is it. This is the title of the second movie, Super Mario World. And it makes sense, that Yoshi was teased in the post-credits, which I always found a bit weird because Yoshi's actually in the movie. So, it's like, let's tease Yoshi's, even though we've seen Yoshi already. But this Yoshi is now in the real world, so the plot's definitely going to revolve around Mario and this specific Yoshi. But yes, the title of the movie is Super Mario World. And this is releasing in just a few months now. I mean, if you count a few months as 11 months, which is to say, just under a year. It's not a few months. But yeah, Super Mario World is the title. Maybe they'll go the Mario Advance route and call it Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario World. We'll see. Anyway, let's get on to actual Switch 2 stuff. On Nintendo Today, they showed us the home menu, which is always nice. And interestingly, when scrolling down through the settings, you can actually see that the firmware is a continuation of Switch 1, rather than starting again from 1.0. Which it is interesting, the implications of that. Maybe Switch 1's going to continuously be updated with firmware that kind of matches what Switch 2 gets. It'd be interesting if Switch 1 gets all the accessibility stuff that Switch 2 has. But that's the number. It's interesting. But if they keep scrolling down, they show us the brand new 90% battery cap. This is a bit confusingly worded in the actual post itself. They say that Switch 2's battery will stop at 90%. That's not true. You've got to toggle this on first. But when you toggle that on, the Switch 2's battery will not charge beyond 90%. And you may wonder, why would you do that? Well, this is actually a fairly common thing in smartphones. You can cap the battery at 90, which basically means that the battery capacity is never being pushed over 100%, which is to say, the battery is less likely to deteriorate. So you're never maxing the thing out, never pushing it beyond what it should be doing, and that should make the battery run healthier, but at the cost of never being a full 100% charged. So if you want to use that, you can. Personally, I think I'll probably just max out the battery because I take this thing on the go a lot. But for those who don't necessarily leave the house with their Switch too much, maybe 90% cap is an ideal thing. Now, Nintendo themselves have kinda shared a spec sheet for the Switch 2, but it really doesn't go into any specifics on what the hardware actually is under the hood. Whereas our friends at Digital Foundry have given us their unofficial, official spec sheet. So let's go through it real quick. I have linked to their video in the description where Rich explains exactly what everything is, but here's a breezier and faster version of that. So compared to Switch 1's Tegra X1 chip, Switch 2 is using NVIDIA T239. This is an 8-core chip rather than a 4-core that the Switch 1 had. And interestingly, the CPU clocks are actually slower when docked. It's 998 MHz docked and 1101 MHz when mobile, although this is going to make more sense when you see the GPU clocks. As for the CPU system reservation, so the cores that are accessed by the actual OS itself, on Switch 1, out of those 4 cores, 1 was for the system itself. Whereas on Switch 2, there are 2 cores for the system, so 6 cores for the games. So just to reiterate, 2 of those cores are just for the operating system. That includes the home menu, stuff like GameChat, your friends list, whereas the other 6 cores are available to developers. And I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom of this list because this is also in tandem with that. On Switch 1, when it came to the RAM, 0.8GB of the total of 4GB were dedicated to the system, so developers had 3.2 giggies for their games, whereas on Switch 2, there's 12 gigs of RAM total, with 3 gigs dedicated to the system, so 3 times the amount of Switch 1, and 9GB for games. Which is to say, there's going to be 2 CPU cores and 3GB of RAM for the system itself, which will be dedicated to GameChat, the home menu, the eShop, your friends list, and all of that. So a lot more resources are dedicated to the actual system itself than the games compared to Switch 1. But there's also a radical boost in what the games can actually use because there's a lot more going on under the hood too. Anyway, let's go all the way back up. For the CUDA cores, Switch 1 had 256, whereas Switch 2 has 1,536. And going back to the clocks, so the CPU clocks are lower when docked and higher in handheld, whereas the GPU clocks are higher when docked and lower when handheld, so it kind of balances it out, and I guess this is mostly for battery reasons. So I'm not going to read out the Switch 1 comparisons for this one because it's not really relevant in context because they're different chips, but it's 1007 MHz when docked and 561 MHz when mobile, with a max of 1.4 GHz. Which should be used when in load screens, like how Switch 1 had a boost mode for certain load times. The actual RAM itself, while 4GB on Switch 1, was 64-bit LPDDR4, whereas Switch 2 is 128-bit LPDDR5. And our final stat is the memory bandwidth, which on Switch 1 was 25.6GB docked and 21.3GB undocked, whereas Switch 2 is 102GB docked and 68GB undocked. So 3 times as fast undocked, 4 times as fast when docked. So go and check out Digital Foundry's video, there's a lot more info in there, but these are the raw Switch 2 specs. A huge jump over Switch 1. But let's talk about the Switch 1 for a second though. So the Nintendo San Francisco store is going to let you fully customize the colors on a Switch OLED that you buy. So you can customize the Joy-Con color on both the left and right side, and then buy that unit. This was priorly only a thing in Japan, so this is the first time it's made its way across the globe, and honestly, I think it's really, really cool. You can customize the Joy-Con, the wrist straps, and the dock, which is interesting. There's both a white and a black dock option, and I don't think I've seen a black OLED dock. Like, is this just the standard Switch dock? Because the OLED one has the Ethernet built in, so it'd be cool if it's a black OLED one. But yeah, if you find yourself in the Nintendo San Francisco store, you can say, Switch 2 who? I'm gonna get a really colourful OLED instead. And a big thank you to IGN for capturing this footage and putting it in a YouTube short. There's a link to that in the description below. Back to Switch 2 a moment. So seemingly some games that weren't getting upgrade packs were just going to be stuck with a brand new full-price Switch 2 version, right? And that's certainly the case for games like Sonic X Shadow Generations. But going back to Hogwarts Legacy, it does seem that if you own that game on Switch 1, you can get a very discounted, basically a Switch 2 edition priced, new version of the Switch 2 game. So owners of the Switch 1 version of Hogwarts Legacy found that the pre-order page for the Switch 2 version on the eShop was only £8.49 for them, or £12.49 if they have the Digital Deluxe version. And it feels weird to charge more to upgrade the Digital Deluxe version, it's the same thing. But yeah, it's cheaper for them. But it's not just the digital version actually. So if you own the physical version, you can go into the game, click additional content, download the 3 megabyte game, and then on the eShop, the digital Switch 2 version is going to be up for the £8.49 discount. So you could then, I imagine, sell the physical version and just have an £8 Switch 2 version. That should work. Now, I am far more excited about the precedent that this sets, because games like Sonic Generations could be updated in the exact same way. I understand that some games when they were ported to Switch 1 had to basically have a new version, so Hogwarts was very torn apart and stapled back together for Switch 1, and maybe doing a patch wouldn't have really fixed that, so a brand new SKU might be the only way, without a huge update patch. So it somewhat makes sense to do it this way, but I wish that other games that could have had upgrades would do the same thing. And maybe it's not too late for that. But yeah, pretty cool for now. And the final piece of news that I want to share has been lurking around since the April Direct ad. In fact, there's a small print for this within the Direct itself. But if you were to go on to the specifics about GameChat on Nintendo's website, you may see this text right here. Mobile phone number registration required to use GameChat. So when you set GameChat up, you are going to have to provide your mobile number, otherwise you can't use GameChat. And you might be wondering, what is the reason for this? PlayStation Network doesn't do that, Xbox Live doesn't do that, Steam doesn't do that, and I can't really give you a rational answer, although Brandon had a good hypothesis. He thought that maybe this was because of what happened with SwapNote. So if you remember on 3DS, a lot of illegal things happened on SwapNote, which caused them to just delist the app and stop supporting it. So maybe the reason that they require your phone number is for security reasons, because they don't trust what happened last time they had a messaging service. So that might be it, and I think that is the most rational and realistic explanation for it. I'm not happy about supplying my phone number to Nintendo, but I understand it on those merits somewhat. Anyway, that is the news for today. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And you and I are gonna have a little stare down before we go. Bye-bye.